All right, cool. I don't know what happened. It may have been that, we were on for a long time. Okay, so what we're saying is that the sort of ordinary evolutionary process can explain the necessity of the emergence of various things like with the disk that Eric talks about. In the context of the necessity, the increasingly self-aware necessity of having a kind of a maximally controlled, think like steam engine, maximally controlled relationship with the adjacent possible that kind of increases the fuel of your adjacent actual, but doesn't disrupt your adjacent actual, right? And that's kind of, that's the Scylla and Charybdis, like navigating between those two. Too much, what is it? The alchemist, too much solve, and the thing begins to break apart in its interior. Too much coagula, and it begins to fall behind those who actually have more solve. And so you've kind of got that dynamic. Okay, so we've got all that. And as I said, there was, I think, the way I proposed it is that in the West in particular, the unreasonable success of the approach of increasingly materialist, third-person, objective, scientific analysis in the context of the broader term of the military-industrial complex led to a selection function whereby the various things that the systems of justification talk about, influence, prestige, a felt sense of success, was oriented towards that subset of the exploration of the space of possibility that mapped to increasing the effectiveness of the military-industrial complex.
Brilliant.
And sort of here we are.
Okay, so let me pause just in turn. I'm going to spit back to you what you said and what's happening for me at a particular level. It's really useful. Okay, so for me, audience, what's happening is my clarity on the game A society moves that emerge out of modernity just upgraded.
Okay. You want to say a little bit more about that?
And what I mean by that is that certainly I want to understand sort of, okay, so for me, game A takes off 10,000 years ago, okay? And that's regulated in the oral and indigenous relation in a particular way. We try to down-regulate dominance, and because we don't get access to resources, the inequality, and because we got Dunbar number relations, we're hanging. And a huge amount of what they do is they down-regulate ego dominance control, what I call the blue line on the matrix. They manage that and they keep us connected. Okay, it's one of the great insights of the oral tradition. Then all of a sudden we drop into agriculture and we drop into cities and civilization. We come up off of nature, and writing's unbelievably huge, and we create traditional formal systems of justification that regulate us as civilized beings, but actually we don't know each other. We're coming to a market. I'll give you shit, you give me shit, and then there's Hammurabi's code that is saying, hey, these are the laws that the people in power now are dictating in relation. Okay. And then there is certainly then the competition between the polises, the cities that are actually organizing their structure. And now we got game A in good stead here. Okay. And then then modernity happened. Okay. And modernity is a totally another shift from, and what you get is you get the science and philosophy intellectual systems, and then you get the capital, labor, industrial market systems that then take off. Okay. And here's one of the things that I always wonder about is the relationship between what I call capital C culture, which are the systems of justification, and then the mechanisms of society, which are the industrial organized complicated systems that actually then ground you into the material world and allow, money is a symbol of this shit, but then allow you to actually grind out what it is that you can do and gain more and more power and influence and control. Okay. All right. So what you articulated to me in relationship to what's coming off the Cold War in particular, because as an American, the nature in which the military industrial complex then coordinated that shit and positioned it in relationship to other structures to then outcompete to create the apex of game A elements that then actually drive the train globally up into the cliff, okay, that is the 21st century, has another level of clarity and resonance in my system. So I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Great. You're very welcome. So what's the so there's a couple of things we could do. We can kind of do more history, do more sort of
Mhm.
telling of stories from the past, in which, by the way, there are many. Like you can
Right.
grab it at all kinds of points. You can grab it at the level of media and tell the media story, which is awesome. You can grab it at the level of like take distinct cultures, like the fact that say that how the way the Soviet Union is connected very closely to Sumeria. Right, there's some
Mhm.
interesting stuff there. Like there's all kinds of cool lineage stories. Or you can say, okay, we're at a point now that's a really like this is a key point. And of
Yep.
course, this is the thing that I've been trying to hammer in for a long time. Is like,
Totally.
look, as far as I can tell, we are at a place where game A as a game reaches its terminus in one of two ways. Right? It
Yep.
either opens up into this new thing, which I'm just going to nominate as game B, right?
Right.
We've actually been able to talk about some of the content of what it may look like on the other side of it,
Totally.
which
Mhm.
is the fulfillment of systems of justification in general.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, or, we sort of don't, we have more
Now let
power
me
than
add, in
wisdom
accordance with the sacred, if you want to
in
connect
accordance
it.
with the sacred. Yeah,
In
absolutely. That's
accordance with the sacred, right?
fundamentally.
As opposed to an instrumental corruption. Okay, as opposed to an instrumental corruption. What do I mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the thing that hit me, here's the thing that hit me, is that, okay, I'm in the heart of the Enlightenment. I'm doing Kant and I'm doing Hume on the philosophy side, and I'm doing Galileo and Newton on the other side. And then I'm tracking how psychology tries to get jammed, that meaning the modern science of whatever we call the mind in the 19th and 20th century tries to get jammed into the system of justification. That's where my and then American version of that, which becomes the dominant version of what psychology is a particular history of justification that falls off of that. Okay. And now I'm waking up to the echo of that and be like, oh my God. But the thing that this conversation just hit me with is we just said the same kind of echo, that at least ideological echo, that allows the military industrial complex to take place. There are aspects of that that actually have the same echo,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. And if we're going to then say, actually, what we need is a new kind of consciousness, okay, if we can trace the blind spots in the systems of justification that actually then corrupt what would allow us to conduct to the sacred, we can correct for that and then get aligned.
Yes, that is it. Okay. Wow, that's exactly it. Oh my God, dude. What happened there was I was literally at a whiteboard talking to Eric or to Brett Weinstein about what was the thing, and that's it. Like that's the thing. That's the thing we've been trying to figure out. So let me say this in a slightly different way because I want to really make it robust. I've been contemplating a whole lot the things that have been put forth by Tyson Yunkaporta in relationship to the indigenous.
Okay.
And as you said, they had a thing that had a solidity to it for long periods of time, and in fact had a solidity to it that significantly transcended the Dunbar limit for long periods of time. Right? They were able to find ways to have deep, strong. Whoa, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, okay, I guess something just happened. My screen just flipped. They had deep, strong Dunbar scale relationships, and then they had systems of justification, cultural, ritual characteristics that were able to do things like maintain integrity across third and fourth cousin relationships that then extended out to large populations over large territories over long periods of time.
Right.
And as he has said quite explicitly, if there is sort of one thing that is at the absolute center of their thing, it's look, narcissism must be quashed. Right? If somebody shows up as a narcissist, call it out. And if they start presenting us more, beat the shit out of them. Like he's like, it's got to be fast, it's got to be severe, and then there's got to be a very powerful pathway back in. Right? You got to have all three of those things. It's no like they're like it's no joke. This shit's dangerous.
Right. It's an immune system against game A.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so here's the inquiry. And by the way,
okay.
I don't know. So let me tell you a story. I'm gonna tell you two stories.
All
right. One story is a story where the indigenous folks were just right. Like that's it. That's the whole code. Something happened. Like the immune system didn't quite quash it, and we had a kind of a runaway game A virus that spread throughout the entire human population. And by the way, ain't the first time. Right? If you kind of run back in history, we'll notice that there were sort of variations on game A that kept popping up, and everybody who got infected by it had a really hard time. but the sort of, because the indigenous way of life has a lot of resilience to it, certain people would die and whatever, but at the end of the day, the ability to sort of make your life work at the indigenous level is pretty strong, right? So in this case, same thing. Shit's going to fall apart. 8 billion people are going to die. We're going to go back down to a couple 100 million people who will be living an indigenous way of life. And it'll be the 53rd time that's happened. Oh, well, that was a really bad virus. Wish we could stop that, but that's it. That's as good as it gets. Right? That's the beginning and end of the whole story.
Right.
And maybe that's it. That could be true. When I think about the degree of toxicity that is intrinsic in almost every aspect of our civilized world, even things like sitting in a chair, right? How much sitting in a chair fucks up your back and your neck and your shoulders, and how much body soreness you have, or using a mouse, or drinking anything besides absolutely pure natural water from your local environment, full of all the biomes that will cause if I think about that, and I think about the degree of difficulty of being able to not be strictly indigenous and still have something equivalent to long-term enduring complex health, a big part of me goes, no fucking way. That's just guaranteed to not work. The only answer is the answer that was discovered by evolution 50,000 years ago.
Control-Alt-Delete this thing and let's reboot.
Yep. Everybody, let's find a way to peacefully go gracefully off into that night. And if you're good at figuring out how to sort of reinvent living on the land in the indigenous way, and I don't mean old school agriculture, I mean all the way back.
Nomadic.
End of story. All right. That's one story. That's one way of doing it. That story would have something along the lines of a very ugly next few decades, right? Ugliest imaginable, which, by the way, given the way that technology works, probably ends up with everybody dying. Right? I don't see why we wouldn't end up inventing like nano mRNA self-replicating robot viruses that just literally wipe out all humans. There's no reason why the military industrial complex would not figure that shit out. So it's probably the case that story isn't really a story now, but it might be. And some humans might end up surviving, and then they'd have to kind of rediscover the indigenous.
Right.
Okay, there's another story. The other story says something like, something super, super decisive happened in that indigenous to game A transition. That there was something intrinsic to the nature of the indigenous, and the nature of things like, say, I don't know, population, or the adjacent possible, right? The writing, or not writing, how would I say it? Inscribing information in media other than human brains and talking is just in the adjacent possible. It just lives there. And so it will consistently be discovered and rediscovered. So that cycle of a virus that gets outside the immune system of the indigenous is intrinsic, unavoidable, and that's kind of like the basic. The game A is sort of always waiting in the wings, and that one way or another, it's a terminal problem. Like unless you can figure out a way to categorically do something that is at a higher tone, right? So this is then where your story, which is a story that has qualitative change in the relationship between the actual and the possible, seems to happen. We don't seem to have a story that has a single flat space that has been the same for all time, but rather we have a story that the actual does actually change in the kind of possibilities that are available. Which is very distinct from the indigenous story. I mean, the indigenous story is a very different set of cycles and loops and returns that has a bit of a fundamental cyclicality or a fundamental sort of stasis to it. Now, by the way, at the transcendent mode, at the level of the absolute possible without any regard to the actual, that is true. Right? The infinite is the infinite. There's no change that can happen in the context of the infinite.
Right. Well, that's the backdrop.
But in the relationship between the actual and the possible, right, we have something different. So and I would just say like the possibility, I'm just going to put it out there, or maybe the plausibility, and I don't know how plausible it is. There's some new tone, right? There's something that takes us to the point where game A is quashed completely. It is extinguished as a location in the possibility space. It's no longer a thing that can happen. Or at least so infinitesimally that it's the equivalent of those vertices and edges in our six-sided dice. And that's what you just described. You just described, okay, can we go back and look at the blind spots that happen in systems of justification until we can create a geometric system of justification?
Yes. Think about this. Okay, so there are unique properties of scale that happen in cities, as you note, right?
Yep.
Okay. What if we could angle those unique properties in social relations that uploaded the oral indigenous sensibility in those relations?
Uploaded?
Yeah, well, this is a distance, so give me a little bit of leeway here.
Go for
it.
it.
All right. So what I hear when you talked about the Sibian and the scale and the interesting, I can't remember the authors of the book Scale, but you were talking about, hey, there's some really interesting features that happens when humans get together around in cities, right? In relationship to actual kinds of wealth and actual kinds of productivity. Okay. Now the question is, well, what kind of power and productivity can we be guided towards? What we don't want to be guided toward is corrupt game A. Okay. Can we then channel that off of game A into a wisdom commons? Okay. And then one of the sensibilities that we can then upload perhaps is the death of the ego in relationship to the commons. And what I mean by that is, can we manifest the values of the proximity afforded by the civium in relationship to giving us the capacity to infect the actual and open up adjacent possibles that allows for the planting of the growth of the sensibility of the oral indigenous?
Yeah. And so this is kind of a weird way of saying it, but what my mind was kind of struggling and looking at is that as you were saying that, what I saw was this is the way that you shift the notion of the custodial species, which is what the way Tyson describes the indigenous mode, from the custodial species of Gaia to the custodial species of cosmos.
Okay. Yes. That jives. Okay. Yes, I know that was a bit of a shift, and it was mostly perceptual. And if I wasn't clear on some of the specifics, but it was a network vision, basically.
Yeah. So let's see. Go back to where you were when you were talking about a geometric system of justification. You didn't say it that way, but that's the way I'm saying it.
No, but actually, can I ask you just to revisit what you found appealing about scale? I remember hearing two or three conversations with people. There's the book Scale, right? And there are the particular properties that happen.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll recapitulate the basic proposition.
Which is my understanding is that the notion of civium for you relates to some of these properties, right?
Yep, very, very much so.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And it actually has, okay. Yeah, we may be able to break through to something new actually in this move if we have the energy and luck. All right, so here's the proposition. Empirically, what Jeffrey and Luis and others discovered was that for the most part in living systems, what you see is a subunity relationship of scale. Right. So as I increase the mass of an elephant or a biological organism, I decrease the metabolic rate, or more specifically, the metabolic rate actually grows at 0.85. Right? So if I double the mass, the metabolic rate decreases as a percentage of as a ratio. And this, by the way, they discovered was true across a large number of different kinds of things, not just metabolic rate, mostly having to do with flux, though, flux of energy, and across a very large number of different modes. So cells in a bodies, but also like colonies, forests, trees, and corporations. Okay. A corporation, they saw, looks a lot like a ecosystem. It has a lot of basic similarities. So if I double the number of employees of a company, I actually increase the productivity of the employees of the company by 0.85. So it asymptotes. There's a point at which this growth of a company just becomes no longer effective. You cannot put all people in a company and have it be the most effective company. That's actually very interesting what that means. The implications of that are quite significant. Then they discovered this other phenomenon with it, which they found only in cities, although that's not entirely true, but we'll say that for now, which was that there were certain characteristics, most notably wealth and innovation, and by the way, other ones like crime and disease, that increased at a 1.15 when you doubled the population. So if I take a city that everybody makes $10,000 a year or a month, and the city is 1 million people, and all I do is I double it to 2 million person city. Now everybody makes $11.50 a month.
Right.
Everybody makes $11.50 a month, which means, of course, since I've doubled the city and I've increased the per capita by 1.15, the absolute number is a lot larger. So the concentrated wealth that happens there is a lot larger. But I've also increased the innovation. Patents and stuff like that. And so then the story that I told was a story of, okay, if given this being, let's just say it's true. Let's just take it as an axiom. Then what you get is this problem. The problem the city is trying to solve is, how do I get all humans in the same city? Because up until relatively recently, the only way that human beings could engage in interaction, right? The story is, the thing that's really happening is just human beings in interaction with each other.
Right.
And that up until relatively recently, the only way that people could get into any meaningful interaction was to be within walking distance of each other.
Right.
Or at least horse riding, but walking distance.
Right.
So that means I got to pack a lot of bodies in close. Well, I got to pack a lot of bodies in close, but I have problems with, how do I get food into the city? How do I get watered? How do I get waste out of the city? And which creates this extended territory that we're now going to call the empire, which is an extractive mechanism to sort of acts as a subsidiary construct of basically the extended body of the city. But the city is the actual central generative attractor. And by the way, it tends to evaporate the characteristics of the most urbane individuals. So the smart kid in the small town goes to the big city. So the small town now becomes increasingly only functional as a subsidiary of the city, because the generativity that was in the small town's human indigenous matrix was pulled into the city's cosmopolitan citified matrix. And so you get a bunch of different feedback loops, and then you get empires, the whole of the Roman Empire is like a continuous effort to figure out how to actually create a capacity to densify the population and the creativity at the center of all roads lead to Rome. All right. So then the next move to say, if we're conscious of that, what we can say is that if what we're trying to do, if the essence of the thing that makes a city interesting is to get human beings in relationship with each other, then we can say, well, let's just do that in a mode. This is very similar to the notion of the brain, right? The difference between the brain and the body. If we can get the human beings in relationship with each other in a mode that is no longer meaningfully bound by the constraints of thermodynamic entropy. I'm not trying to pack bodies into one space. I'm trying to pack minds into one space. And I have two moves that happen there that are very powerful. And by the way, the second move is the indigenous piece in a big way, right? The first move is I can be very aware of the fact that I no longer, like a lot of the things that happen in the city, the extractive nature of the city, go away, because I don't need to yoke so much of human potential to supporting this. It's kind of like a strong force, weak force. Right? There's a repulsive force of a city, and I have to put more and more energy into packing more and more people into the same space. Now that repulsive force goes down, because the virtual allows those conjunctions to happen at much, 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 much less cost, which also, by the way, means I can get more minds in relationship. So I start getting my 15% feedback at a higher and higher loop. And I get
exactly what I saw.
A step function. Exactly. Okay. So that's one piece of the move. The other piece of the move is I can now return the body back to an indigenous way of living. I can actually live among a Dunbar level group of people in a location that is in fact optimized for pure, clear water that I can drink with my hand, and that the plants that I eat are the plants that grow near me, and fill in the blank, right? Really, really render unto the body what is the body. It's like discover, rediscover, and without a lot of bullshit, without a lot of trying to force, you don't have to do massive antibiotic injections, because you're no longer having, animals and humans living in close density. You're no longer having animals living, like that whole thing, like a reorganization of that entire thing back to a case that is not just sustainable, but fucking delightful, right? Like actually full of real serious fulfillment and well-being for everybody for a long period of time.
That's it.
Then you have the next piece, which is the piece that we kind of settle on, which is, and we need to manage the relationship between the body and the mind, between the physical aspect of the civium that is happening in locations, and the virtual aspect of the civium that's happening increasingly inside the modality of the possible, so as to avoid the corruption. Right? And so
Yep.
here's where Tyson presents the term of the distinction between, how's it describe it? Like more and I can't remember. He has good words, but I'll just describe it this way. He says, okay, there's sort of two basic ways you can go about trying to make a smarter brain. You can make a smarter brain by growing the brain, just add more cells to it. Or you can make a smarter brain by focusing on how to make increasingly high quality connections among the cells that already exist. Right? And of course, the human brain is that discovery. Right? Once you reach the limits of the birth canal, there was a constraint on how many more cells you can add. You couldn't add any more. And so the only way to get smarter was to infold and then start doing things like plasticity and synaptic reinforcement and discover the entire dimensionality of that. Right? The same thing happens in the mode of the civium. Right? Once you begin to realize that the possibility of conversation is no longer bound by who happens to live nearby you. Right? So first order, small town, it's just, you're going to have to sort of have the conversation with the folks who happen to live nearby you. Second order, transportation. Well, I'm going to move to the big city and I'm going to find a neighborhood that has people who are cooler and smarter and more interesting. Third order, the only real question now happens when it's possible to have a conversation with literally anybody. And the quality of the virtual continues to move in the direction that the bandwidth and the richness of the embodied capacity in relationship continues to be reinforced, right? This is better than Facebook, but immersive VR with haptic suits is better than that. Like that's a part of the story. Then the question becomes not how many, but which. Right? The quality of relationship, qualitative, not quantitative, becomes the economy. I don't want to increase GDP. I want to have, in fact, a fixed GDP. I want to actually have an economy that takes the limits of material and energy as a fixed constraint. And then I want to have the thing in terms of quality of relationship be the thing that continues to grow because there's no limit to quality. And that's it, right? If I can get those three pieces in place, then I've got a foundation that is a totally new thing. Unlocks the potential of Homo sapiens sapiens as a custodial species in a way that actually, by the way, my numbers, if I just run the numbers on this, right, if you just did this and nothing else and it didn't break, we get to the interstellar moment by the end of the century. Just as a rough measure of the complexity of the solution space to some of those problems. But by the way, I don't mean inventing new physics. I mean just being able to sort of implement on physics that we understand. And by hypothesis, within the surface, within the volume of the sphere of the intelligence that's unlocked within that construct, there's a whole bunch of new physics. We don't understand.
Okay, that's beautiful. That came cleaner even than I was thinking. So that's just that hit me nicely, very, very nicely, and just aligned. So you notice that where you use the word quantity to quality. Okay? All right. Let's tie that back and remember that we shifted empiricism into third person quantity. Okay. And then we killed subjective quality in certain ways. Right? Make that link and then make what, a Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance link here. The issue with this shift that we need to do is what is the indicator of quality that we are actually moving towards? What is the wealth innovation, right, that our networks can actually produce? Right? Not gain A, gain B, wealth innovation. We need to create the network and the virtual reality, although it's dangerous shit, it also sets the stage. It's going to happen anyway, unless we all crash and burn, but it will set the stage potentially if we can extract with conscious evolution the angles of interface that's both embodied and virtual that allows that possibility to be realized.
And if you think about the transition from here to there is as simple as a comprehensive. So it's funny. So you know how a field effect works, right? The key thing to a field effect is that it happens everywhere in the field evenly. That you don't have any cost of each individual point. Once you've got a field,
it's moving.
Like if I have a single radio transmitter, I can have an arbitrarily large number of radio receivers at no incremental cost. And that's a field effect. I can have one radio transmitter creates a field of potential of listening to music. Every radio that gets turned on does not change that in any meaningful way. All right. So imagine if you were able to generate a field effect of the progressive downregulation of narcissism.
Yes.
Progressive downregulation of defection against the whole, right? So it's something like, everybody everywhere gets a nudge away from narcissism, away from defection, and towards, collaboration, and towards increasingly towards sovereignty is actually precisely the term that was defined to be what that thing is.
Okay.
So because sovereignty is a much larger concept
Yep.
that includes within it the optimal capacity to engage in collaboration with. So therein lies sort of the basic problem. How do you generate that field effect? How do you generate some kind of story which says, hey, look, if you're able to play nicely,
yep,
you're committed to it, right? You're committed to playing nicely.
That by the way, that's what this, the idea of the coin is basically to have the coin, okay, and then to create a particular kind of currency that's oriented toward a wisdom commons. So then you're like, oh, I have downloaded my narcissism and I'm now ready to play, game B.
Yeah, right. And some pieces of it. Some pieces of it are things like, we have all been developed. And by the way, our lineages more or less have all been developing for thousands of generations in the context of what is effectively a psychopathic metastructure. So we're not just like, I didn't just grow up in a circumstance. My lineage has been selected for a long time, certain propensities and capacities, right? And unwinding that, or maybe not even unwinding it, but finding the location in the space of my individual possibility that has continuous integrity with the story that you just told, right? With that a capacity to not just intend to, but to actually deliver on, not defecting, right? Not being narcissistic is super non-trivial. Okay, fair enough. I get it. I will fall, I will fail, I will sometimes unconsciously, I will come off the path over and over and over again. And the trick is going to be how quickly do we notice as individuals and groups that has happened? And then how effectively do we heal the consequences of it? And how effectively do we get people back on the path? Like those are the three modes that actually need to be instantiated.
Let me pause on the psychopathic, because let's I want to double click on that and see.
Shoot. I got a call I got to do.
All right. It's 3:00.
Yeah. We went for a while. This is good though. We should just keep doing this. Like this is nice.
Yeah, no, that several things hit. Okay, right, brother. So I'm happy with posting this if you want. I thought it was really interesting. So we can come back to it and discuss.
This is a big bite, a lot to consume, but it's hopefully anybody who chews it is glad they did.
No, it's a big bite. We'll circle back around. That was I'm going to go for a walk. That was marvelous. That was awesome, a lot of wealth innovation. See you, man. Take care.